Going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Good morning and welcome to Sunday with Michael Portillo, with 2 hours of good conversation, arts and entertainment, ethical dilemmas and a sense of the ridiculous too. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, unveiled his spring budget this week, with the UK economy having escaped recession by a whisker. Did he miss the bigger picture? With the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank in the United States and the bailout of Credit Suisse, is there another banking crisis? As Vladimir Putin is indicted for war crimes, could the war in Ukraine be about to get worse? The Russians downed an American surveillance drone over the Black Sea. Does that make the conflict more dangerous? Artificial intelligence is no longer the future, it is present. Applications like ChatGPT are here now. How can lawmakers encourage the good and outlaw the bad? And walk on the wild side, enjoying Britain's plant life and eating it. That's all after the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Good morning. It is just after 11 o'clock. Let's get you up to date with the headlines from the GB newsroom. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is planning to deport the first migrants to Rwanda by the summer. Speaking in Kigali, she says the timing depends on pending legal battles and has indicated the UK could leave the European Court of Human Rights if it hinders the plan. The agreement with Rwanda has been expanded to include all illegal migrants, not just asylum seekers.
Progress is being made rapidly, and I'm really confident on the back of the progress that I've seen here in Kigali that we will be able to operationalise this world-leading agreement very, very soon. The big point here is that there will be a package of high-quality humanitarian support for people who will be relocated to Rwanda. That, combined with our robust new laws, will enable us to break the business model of the people smuggling gangs.
Well, the deal with Rwanda has cost £140 million so far. And Shadow Levelling Up Secretary Lisa Nandy says that money could have been better spent.
We think you should take that money, put it into the National Crime Agency, create a cross-border cell that disrupts the criminal gangs and send the clearest possible message to those criminal gangs that their behaviour won't be tolerated and that will bring them to account should they persist. Instead, we've had more and more of the tough talk from this government, and last year the boat crossings hit a record high of 45,000. It's not working, and it's about time the government recognised that.
Boris Johnson will publish evidence in his defence over allegations he misled Parliament on the Partygate scandal. He's expected to submit a 50-page dossier to the Commons Privileges Committee tomorrow before being questioned by MPs on Wednesday. The investigation is being chaired by Labour's Harriet Harman, but the panel has a Conservative majority. Cabinet Minister Oliver Dowden believes the former Prime Minister will provide compelling evidence.
Having worked with Boris for many years in different capacities, I'm quite sure that he will put forward a very robust defence of his case when he appears before the committee on Wednesday. Ultimately, this is a procedure of the House of Commons, and it's always been the case in these sort of things. It's up to individual members to make up their own minds. So first of all, it will be for the committee to make a determination, and if that necessitates it going to the floor of the House, it will be up to each individual MP to make up their mind.
Well, former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng has accepted he and Liz Truss made mistakes with their mini-budget last autumn, which triggered market turmoil. In an exclusive interview with GB News, he says the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has done a good job of stabilising the economy.
I think Jeremy, rightly perhaps, has adopted a cautious approach given what happened
last winter. And he's also very much, I think, looking at the markets, looking at what Treasury officials are doing and trying to do it in a methodical way. And that's where I think I and Liz got it wrong.
The Russian President Vladimir Putin's made a surprise visit to the Ukrainian city of Mariupol, according to Russian state media. If confirmed, it would be his first visit to a newly occupied Ukrainian territory since the start of the war. The port city in Donetsk fell last May after being devastated by Russian forces in one of the longest battles of the conflict. A missing 15-year-old girl has been caught on CCTV leaving Glasgow bus station with an unknown man. Police Scotland say Faith Marley hasn't been seen since travelling from Edinburgh to Glasgow on Wednesday. The footage the police have released shows her leaving the Buchanan bus station with a man shortly after 11 o'clock in the morning. Faith is about 5 feet 7 inches tall, medium build, and has dark blonde shoulder-length hair. She was wearing a black hooded top and shoes and leggings. A former Met police officer wants a new review to expose what she called the toxic culture of sexism in the force. Alice Vinton, who served with the Met for 10 years, says the job is attractive to bullies chasing power. She also says police services can only change if bosses admit the profession does attract the wrong kind of people. The review, published next week, will look at the culture and standards in the force. And an emergency alert will be sent to mobile users across the UK next month to test a new public warning system. Its aim is to make people aware of potentially life-threatening situations, including flooding and wildfires. The siren-like alert will be sent on the 23rd of April, and users will not be able to use their phones until they acknowledge it. This is GB News, more as it happens. But now it is back to Sunday with Michael Portillo.
Well, many thanks to Aaron. The budget last Wednesday was, in my view, pretty much a non-event, although it's resulted in one trade union, the British Medical Association, approving the government's plan to allow senior doctors to save more into their pension schemes, while Labour is pledged to reverse it. Last week, Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank went bust. This week, another bank, Credit Suisse, revealed that it had material weaknesses and took a £44 billion lifeline from the Swiss government. 11 US banks clubbed together to help out First Republic Bank, whose share value had tanked. After the banking crisis of 2008, governments around the world wanted to reassure us that it would never happen again. New rules were introduced both in Europe and in the United States to bolster the stability of the financial sector. So why are banks failing again? So-called Dr. Doom, Nouriel Roubini, who predicted the 2008 crisis, warned back in November that the global economy was facing another variant of the Great Depression due to aggressive interest rate rises, rising public and private debt, and inflation. To discuss this, I'm joined by Professor Patrick Minford from Cardiff University. Economics and business consultant Vicky Price also joins us. Welcome to you. First of all, Vicky Price, why do you think banks are failing?
It's interesting what you said at the beginning, that there were more rules introduced to make banks safer. But what has happened is that quite a lot of the smaller banks, some that have emerged relatively recently, don't quite fall into those under those rules, in the sense that quite a lot of what they have been doing is quite risky. They have been lending to areas such as the tech sector, which is generally not making very much money, particularly startups, taking in deposits, of course, from them as well, which they need at times of difficulty. So this is what's been happening with the Silicon Valley Bank. The tech company started removing their money for all sorts of reasons. And they have been investing in order to balance their books in government bonds, those or mortgage-backed securities. Those seem to be quite safe at the time of low interest rates. The moment that interest rates started rising and yields started also increasing, it meant that bond prices started falling. So if they were trying to balance their books, selling those bonds they couldn't, in fact, do so. And so they sold loads at a loss and they became insolvent. That's basically what has been happening in that area. So specialized banks that really needed to perhaps have, better risk management. And we now discover that they didn't have a lot of that. In fact, one of them didn't even have a risk manager officer for months on end. It's not really the same with the bigger banks, which are quite well capitalized. But nevertheless, what happened with the two banks that you mentioned has spread the sort of fear of another crisis across, and Moody's downgraded all US banks, or rather the entire US banking system, as soon as the Silicon Valley Bank problems arose.
The banks, both in Europe and the United States and indeed Japan, between them have lost hundreds of billions of value on the stock markets. I think, Vicky, many people will be dismayed to hear you say that these people, after a period of record low interest rates, which had no precedent really in history, had not prepared for the fact that interest rates might go up again. I mean, this is absolutely extraordinary.
Well, it is, except, of course, we've seen the inflation issues coming because of partly coming out of COVID, but also, of course, the war in Ukraine. So that prompted central banks to raise their interest rates. I don't think that scenario could have been predicted that much. But yes, what comes down goes up as well, like interest rates, and what goes up can come down as well. I mean, the interesting thing right now is that because, people are moving out of shares, not just banks, but more generally, you've seen the FTSE 100 losing value. You've seen quite a lot of movement out of normal stocks as well. It's gone back into government bonds and treasuries in the US, which has meant that yields have come down. So the market behaves in a very extraordinary way. So predicting that on a, if you like, daily basis, or even if you were just a few months ago trying to see what would happen to interest rates, you would not have been anticipating that interest rates would be as high as they are now.
OK, but I think these people should not be in the business of predicting. They should be in the business of protecting the money that people like you and I put into them. Patrick Minford, do you blame management, lack of regulation or government policies?
Well, we had a great volatility in monetary policy, which I think lies at the heart of this. If you go back to COVID, central banks pushed up the rate of growth of the money supply massively, and were one of the major origins of the inflation we've had. And then, of course, they've kind of gone back on that in a very destabilizing way, which I think has actually brought the rate of growth of the money supply right down to zero. And now we've had this huge variation in monetary policy, which lies at the heart of all this volatility in the banking sector. And it's really bad that central banks have pursued these whiplash policies, which have undermined the stability of the global economy.
Patrick, did we find last summer, when Liz Truss was Prime Minister, late summer, did we find that our pension funds were also dependent on low interest rates in a way that had not been predicted? And I'm going to put you on the spot here, because you were a supporter of Liz Truss's economic policies. Had you not spotted the fragility of pension funds in that case, their fragility if interest rates were to rise?
Well, no, I don't think I was aware, like many people, of just what the pension funds were getting up to with these leveraged policies. And it came as a big surprise, I think, and the regulators had permitted it and even encouraged it. So it was a big surprise, there's no question. But the important thing then was for the Bank of England actually to keep the gilt-edged markets stable. And they didn't, you see. So this is another sort of whiplash, because when Liz Truss's government was trying to carry out its new policies, the Bank of England precipitated big swings in the gilt-edged market, and of course it should have stabilized those swings, as eventually, of course, it had to, because of the LTI problem of the pension funds. But it should have done so anyway, because what it was doing was implicitly tightening monetary policy through the huge rise in gilt yields, and it wasn't in line with its plans at all.
See, what I'm not very reassured by is that every time we have a crisis, we're told that the regulations have been tightened. And then when the next crisis comes along, it turns out that there are things going on that we didn't actually know about. Let's turn to the United States for another opinion. Kathleen Day is on the line. She's a former Washington Post journalist, now a lecturer at the Johns Hopkins Carey Business School. Kathleen, why do you think these banks in the United States have collapsed in the last few days?
Because they weren't minding the store. They weren't following common sense. It doesn't take a rocket science to know that sometimes the sun is shining and sometimes it rains. And you know what? Might be a good idea to have an umbrella sometimes. The fact is, there were regulations that might have, it's over, this is, I'm sorry to say that I'm old enough to have seen this happen so often, just in the United States, and of course then that infects the world economy, where we pass laws, common sense laws, to make banks do common sense, safety, and soundness activity, and then we suspend it when the sun is shining as though it's never going to rain again. And that's what happened during the Trump administration. Two things happened. After the 2007-2012 crisis, legislation was put in with a lot of common sense rules that should have been in there, and partly to protect taxpayers. I'm kind of sick of the banks picking my taxpayer pocket, but I don't know about you, but I am. And so the Trump administration lifted to, it said, let's not have stress tests. So if you don't look in the laboratory and see what monster is being created, of course you don't know there's a monster in the laboratory. Well, it's called accounting rules, and they weren't checking. They weren't doing stress tests to say, hey, what will happen if it rains? What happens if interest rates go up? Because interest rates, in my opinion, interest rates have been too long, kept artificially low. They obviously were going to go up at some point. And then we had COVID, and then we had inflation caused by supply side disruptions, ships getting caught in canals, Chinese all staying home. I mean, you were not going to bring down inflation by having central banks raise interest rates, but they did. So
Kathleen,
what can you do?
Kathleen, I'm only interrupting for clarification. Are you saying to me that a couple of banks took silly risks and were mismanaged, or are you saying that this is across the system? Are we looking at a systemic problem and a systemic crisis potentially?
Well, in any economic cycle, the banks always lag. They're always lending too much when they should stop, and they're always coming in a little late. But the exaggerated way in which this happens comes from regulators really not doing their job. You know, the banks are out there to make money. That's understandable. But in the United States, the theory is, and why the name of my book is Broken Bargain, the bargain is you have deposit insurance. That was a deal that was made in the 1930s in the United States after the 1929 crash and resulting depression. And the deal was you get this taxpayer backstop in exchange for some common sense oversight. It's actually been an argument going back to Jefferson and Hamilton. And so what happens is, again, when there doesn't seem to be a problem, everyone says we don't need this regulation. So in the Trump administration, they did away with two common sense rules. They said, we're not going to stress for tests. We're not going to do a stress test. Let's not think about if interest rates go up, what might happen to the balance sheet. And the second thing they did is say the Volcker rule. I'm sure people remember Paul Volcker, my hero, now deceased central banker who was everyone trusts. You may hate him or love him, but he was the honest broker. It's sort of like the Warren Buffett of central banking. So he thought banks ought not to be gambling with with taxpayer funds. And that's essentially what they're doing, because if they gamble and lose, we then create a systemic risk that for which the government then has to come in and save everybody. So is it across the board? Yes, kind of, but who knows how badly. And by the way, this is more like the 1980s banking crisis because it's a liquidity and interest rate problem. It is not like the crisis of 2007 when they were just making the stupidest loans possible.
Kathleen, very, very clear. Thank you very much. I want to ask the other two, just more or less a yes or no answer. Vicky Price, should we be very worried?
I think we should be worried. Not very worried, but worried.
Patrick?
Yeah.
Well, I think we should worry about monetary policy going even tighter when it's clearly become excessively tight, as this crisis shows.
OK, so Patrick, you're giving a warning. You're talking about what future policies should be. Vicky Price saying we should be worried. I think Kathleen probably saying much the same. Thanks to all three of you, to Kathleen Day, Professor Patrick Minford and to Vicky Price. Coming up, dramatic footage shows a Russian fighter plane dumping fuel on an American drone. Should we be worried about escalation? That's after the break.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway, Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Welcome back. President Putin has been indicted by the International Criminal Court. And whilst there are two sides to every story, the United States scored a propaganda coup by releasing dramatic footage showing a Russian jet emitting a plume of fuel over an American drone, disrupting its cameras. Moments later, the aircraft hit part of the drone, leading it to crash. The White House condemned Moscow's actions as unsafe, unprofessional and reckless, while Russia rather limply denied that its aircraft came into contact with the drone. Russian and US aircraft have operated over the Black Sea during Moscow's war in Ukraine, but this is the first incident of this kind since the conflict began. I'm joined by Rear Admiral Chris Parry, a former NATO commander. Chris, how alarmed are you by this? Do you see it as an escalation?
No, I don't. This is simply bad driving by the Russian pilot who's trying to dump fuel. He got a very high sink rate, as we call it in the profession. and I'm afraid he messed it up and hit the back of the drone. We shouldn't be alarmed about that. He didn't attack it. I just think he's got a good ticking off for damaging his own plane when he went back.
Very good, Chris. You help us to keep calm. But you don't just mean that he was routinely dumping fuel. He was obviously aiming the fuel at the drone.
Yeah, it was designed to try and cut out the engine or make it stall and bring it down. It's a well-known technique, and I think there's a pair of Su-27s. They've done it before, and I expect they'll try it again in future. And if there is any escalation, it'll be that NATO will want to protect its assets a bit more in the Black Sea. And what the Russians have invited, of course, is increased combat air patrols by NATO to protect its assets.
The United States has certainly not made a tremendous fuss about it. It's kind of ticked Russia off a little bit. So, so you think that it's business as usual for Russia and the United States flying over the Black Sea?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, NATO patrols continue in international airspace. We've got a perfect right to do it. We do it normally anyway, even when there isn't the Ukraine crisis on. So it shouldn't be seen as anything different. I suspect there's been a reset of the sort of rules of engagement, as we say, that govern these things. But I would suggest that if Russia escalates it even further, you're going to see a stepping up of NATO presence in and around Ukraine and in the Black Sea.
Chris, how do you think the war is going? In particular, we were told for a long time that there would be a Russian offensive in February, March. Has that actually occurred, or are we still waiting for it?
You're quite right. We're still waiting for it, and I do wonder whether it's actually going to occur. My impression is the Russian army is totally broken now, and we're seeing the Kremlin putting out peace feelers, and that suggests to me they know they're losing. We're seeing hints also of the Chinese supplying war material in the form of private companies giving or selling material, notably rifles, drone parts and body armor to the Russians. That's not huge. If we start seeing large amounts of military material going to Russia, then the Russians will be in a better position to mount an offensive. But for me at the moment, I don't think the Russians are going anywhere. They're dug in along the top of those 4 provinces that they hold, and I think they're looking to hold on to them. And I think we'll see a frozen conflict soon, because at the moment I don't think the Ukrainians are in a position to launch a decisive offensive either.
I'm always worried that we may be a little too complacent here. I mean, Russia appeared to be defeated before Stalingrad, but what happened, of course, was it was able to summon millions of men, and Russia does have an extraordinary resource in people. Are you not worried that it may be able to regroup?
No, there's no doubt about that. Russia has vast depth and resources, but I just don't think that it is capable as a country of actually generating the sort of fighting potential that it needs to overcome Ukraine. I think its people are tired of the war, and despite the propaganda, I don't think they can maintain momentum. Also, I think the sanctions are starting to bite on Russia at the moment. They can sell oil and gas to China, India, and a number of other countries, but it's at a discounted rate, and I don't think their macroeconomics can stand it for much longer this year. I think there'll be diplomatic pressure to come on Russia from China at some stage, and we've got Xi Jinping visiting this week, and I'm sure Xi Jinping's going to say to Putin, I think you've done enough now. And if I'm honest, Michael, I think if Russia can hang on to those 4 provinces and also Crimea, I think he can probably declare victory. If you can stop the Ukrainians coming back and taking them again, and say, look, I've restored new Russia to you, Ukraine is broken as a state, and I declare victory. I think we need to be prepared for that, unless the Ukrainians can make big inroads into the Russian positions.
Very, very interesting. Rear Admiral Chris Parry, thanks for being on GB News again. She's one of the few politicians who didn't leave office and immediately start work on her memoirs. But former Prime Minister Theresa May is to publish her first book this autumn. Titled The Abuse of Power, it will highlight a series of political scandals and promises to reveal the way that institutions close ranks in order to avoid dishonour and blame. It promises also to reveal the stories behind the Hillsborough and Grenfell tragedies and a number of parliamentary dramas. Mrs May says that the book is part of her continued campaign to address burning injustices that she spoke about as she entered Downing Street to become Prime Minister. She says it will also prompt a rethink of how we approach both politics and public life. but I wonder whether that's realistic. Previous books have lifted the lid on scandals, but hardly shifted the dial. Alan Evans is a political historian and former civil servant, and Andy Hughes is author of A History of Political Scandals. Welcome to you both to GB News. Alan, let me start with you. There's a big battle going on, it seems to me, at the moment between civil servants and ministers, and I'm very sorry about it, and I'm sure you as a former civil servant are very sorry about it. But I wonder if part of it is that ministers think that if anything goes wrong, ministers take the blame, but if anything goes wrong, civil servants never carry the can. Civil servants are not accountable. Do you think that is part of what is going on? And what do you say about the accountability of civil servants?
I think civil servants obviously have accountability, but the key accountability is with ministers. And the issue seems to be, I think, that in a crisis, particularly a short-term hot crisis, and they sort it out, ministers are very happy to say, I took the responsibility and it worked. It's when crises go on for longer, like, say, the Iraq War, like Grenfell, like COVID, that ministers are less willing to say that they take full responsibility. And they tend to look around for who's to blame. And that might be easy things like the weather or the EU or the Chinese or sometimes even officials. But it's very rarely that they'll put their hands up and say, I was to blame for this long-term crisis and I take responsibility for it.
OK, Alan, but on the other hand, can you think of any instance, really, where a civil servant, however poorly he or she might have done the job, has actually had to walk rather than being simply redeployed to another department? Are there any instances of civil servants actually carrying accountability?
Well, the constitutional position, as you know, Michael, is that ministers take responsibility, and when civil servants are involved, you know, they will often say, I was doing it because my minister told me to. Now, do you say, you know, should civil servants take more responsibility? Well, perhaps they should. But, you know, the constitutional position is that ministers are always in charge and ministers are fronting up any crisis.
Andy Hughes, what's your reaction to the news of Theresa May's book? What do you think it might tell us? Why is she going for things like Hillsborough and Grenfell Tower?
Well, I think it's very important that we look at all sorts of different scandals. You know, I've written about some very silly things, some very funny things, but on the other hand, some very serious things as well. And I think it's really important that we look at both sides of the spectrum here, from the funny and the silly, all the way through to the very sad and the very serious. And I'm sure Theresa May, with her former position, will have a lot of inside information that she can put into a book and perhaps address new things, new angles, new perspectives. And I think it's very important, especially that we look again at some of these really, really awful scandals and difficult things that have happened politically over the years. It's all very well if you read my book and, you know, I touch on some of the serious things, but I focus more on some of the silly things. So it's really important that we have that balance between all the different writers, all the different scandals throughout the years.
I'm not so surprised to hear that Theresa May is going to talk about Grenfell Tower, because a few days after it happened, it was a few days after the general election of 2017, she went to the scene and it was not a success. People didn't think that she showed enough connection with the victims and obviously the families of the victims. But Hillsborough, Andy, is a bit more of a surprise, isn't it? I mean, Hillsborough is what, more than 30 years ago, I think?
It is, but still very, very important to many people. I mean, I was born in Liverpool, and I have many Liverpudlian friends, and it's still right at the heart of people who live there. Extremely important that it's still kept in the news and in literature, and it's discussed more, and people talk about it much, much more because how it was handled was a scandal. What happened at the time was a scandal. And for people who have been right at the very top, like Theresa May, it's fantastic that she's still bringing this to the front so people can read about it and learn more. Now, you say it's 30 years ago, but there's a whole new generation, not just of Liverpudlians, but a whole new generation of people from all over the world that need to read about what happened and what went wrong and how it was handled afterwards as well.
Alan Evans, we always say after any of these terrible tragedies that lessons have been learned and never again and so on. But tell me, are civil servants actually educated in things that have gone horribly wrong in the past in order to learn lessons?
I don't think they are educated well enough. Let me give you a good example, though, which was actually last weekend. I think, and I'm not an expert on banking, that the way in which the Chancellor and his officials at Treasury handled the Silicon Valley Bank crisis and managed to ensure that it didn't become a great banking crisis like Lehman's or the crisis of 2008 was very impressive. And I think the Treasury does try and learn lessons. But there is a big problem in British politics that, as you know, Michael, ministers turn over a lot, and so do the turnover of civil servants. Means that often there isn't this corporate knowledge and corporate history. And there's a brilliant book written by the late Professor Anthony King and Ivor Crewe called The Blunders of Our Government. And if I were the Cabinet Office and I wanted to spend money wisely, I would spend £1,000 every year and buy how many copies you can get, 50 copies of that, and say that every Cabinet Minister should read this and learn it. And if I was Keir Starmer, I'd say his shadow cabinet should take it on holiday in the summer and read it, and they can't come back until they've read it, because it shows, to pick up your point and what you said earlier, that, you know, too often crises happen and history is, if not repeating itself, it's making another attempt to come the same way.
That is a very good recommendation. I'm sure the book by Andy Hughes would also be a very good recommendation. Thanks to him and thanks to Alan Evans. Next, he's the man behind both blockbuster musicals and the composer for the music for King Charles's coronation. As Andrew Lloyd Webber celebrates his 75th birthday, we'll be talking about his impact on musicals, theatres and song. That's after the break.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. One man has created 21 musicals, 2 film scores and a Requiem Mass in Latin. His list of achievements is huge. For example, he's only one of 18 people who have won an Oscar, an Emmy, a Grammy and a Tony. He's also responsible for some of the most popular tunes in musical theatre. Andrew Lloyd Webber. This week he celebrates his 75th birthday. The arts editor of Express Online, Stefan Kyriazis, is here. Welcome back.
Thank you.
To what do we attribute this extraordinary level of success?
Number one, some of the most popular tunes in musical history, so these tunes haven't gone away, they're classic. But also, he went in very early within popular culture. He recognised the way that the industry was changing. So he very, very quickly was putting out albums, changing the way that actually musicals were launched. So in very many ways, we think of him now as very establishment. You know, he's writing the music for King Charles's coronation and things like this. But back in the late 60s, early 70s, he was counterculture. He was cool. He was rock and roll. So he's always had a very good instinct for the way that things are moving and changing.
One of your predecessors on that sofa was Sir Tim Rice. He was sitting there one day. And he was talking to me about Evita. We were celebrating, I think, an anniversary of Evita. And indeed, that struck me as a remarkably innovative thing to go into. I mean, suddenly to produce a musical about the wife of a South American president or dictator, whichever way you want to look at him, back in the 1950s. How on earth could that be a success? So Andrew Lloyd Webber, apart from anything else, has chosen good collaborators, has spotted good opportunities.
He's always worked with very good people and good songwriters, obviously Tim Rice, but also Don Black, Jim Steinman, people like this, and then Emerald Fennell recently with Cinderella, and she was coming off an Oscar herself. But I think he's always had, if you'd said to somebody, I'm going to write a show about a bunch of people in cat costumes with whiskers, and they're going to be doing this and crawling around the theatre and rubbing against the audience's legs, and there's no plot, and it's based on old T.S. Eliot poems, you would have been laughed at. And then if you'd said, let's put roller skates on trains and have no story, again, have no human beings on stage, people wouldn't take you seriously. They would absolutely laugh in your face. And yet these are some of the biggest hits of all time in musical theatre.
What was your second reference there? The first one
was Starlight Express.
Starlight Express.
That is still running in Germany. There's a purpose-built arena that's been there since 1988 in Bochum. So that show's been running since 1988 solidly. They pour in from across Europe for it. So he has an absolute instinct. And also, I guess, apart from Cats, which is an incredible concept, a great story.
Are you musical? Do you know how it is that he achieves what he does with his tunes? I mean, it seems to me that they're somewhat formulaic. He probably wouldn't like me to say that. There's always, it seems to me, a kind of sense of yearning.
Sure.
That the musical phrase is never quite completed. You always want to go somewhere else. Why is it that the tunes work so well?
I think you're absolutely correct. Emotional triggers.
Emotional triggers.
So someone like Stephen Sondheim is an absolute genius, and here and there will give you a straightforward, gorgeous melody, but also plays around with it. But very much with Andrew Lloyd Webber, it's about making you feel something. And I would say within classical music, for me, it's something like Tchaikovsky, similar sort of feeling where there's always absolutely that yearning, pain, longing, melancholy. I guess you could think of ABBA or something like that. But you think of, within the topics, Evita is a sad, yearning, longing, a woman that is slowly losing everything after gaining it. Grisabella's song, Memory, in Cats. It's an older cat cast aside again. But the longing, the emotion in it is what he nails absolutely every time.
And the very musical family. The father was very musical. Julian Lloyd Webber is a friend of this particular programme. Sure. He's often involved with us. I mean, these are people who really understand music and know what to do with it. extraordinarily long runs, both in London and New York, and I dare say all over the world. I mean, he must be in the record book for that as well, I think.
Yep, he's one of the absolute best-selling musical theatre creators of all time. Yes, he has broken numerous records all the way through. I think Cats was the longest-running show, then I think it was replaced by Phantom, so he's actually beating his own records, nobody else's records when he's doing it. And it's undeniable, again, popular appeal. So he knows, certainly in the earlier first half of his career, it was one blockbuster musical, and also, again, a British composer on Broadway. He was often bigger on Broadway before here with some of his shows. So undeniably popularist in what he does. But also, I think you should also recognise that he was, in his day, controversial, banned by the BBC for Jesus Christ Superstar. So he's not a safe, cosy option.
Banned by the BBC? I'd forgotten that.
He was banned by the BBC.
I remember when it came out being mildly shocked. Because, you know, I was not allowed to say by my parents, I wasn't allowed to use the names of deities
Absolutely.
as a swear word. So someone singing about Jesus Christ Superstar, this did strike me as well, sacrilegious, blasphemous.
And also, this is 1970. And also, let's remember again, he put it out as an album first. Couldn't get backing, so put this out as an album. This nobody else had done before. That album was the #1 album of the year in the United States, ahead of Carole King's Tapestry. Little fact for you. But also, it was being illegally performed all over the place. People were going crazy for it. They were popping up doing these illegal concerts that they were desperately trying to close down before the show had even launched. And again, yes, absolutely, taking names in vain, the whole religious element, but also looking at Jesus as what we would now recognise, a social media figure. And this is 1970-71, and Jesus himself losing himself to his celebrity, and that's the arc of his story within that. And Judas is the one that's trying to save him and get him back to who he really was. These are all phenomenally ahead of their time.
So a man who was once banned on the BBC, now in the House of Lords, I think.
Yes,
certainly appointed to the House of Lords, and to be the composer of music for the coronation. So that's quite a cycle in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, and he also, I mean, he's been part of the establishment for quite a while. And let's remember, he's also, you know, born and raised in Kensington. So he's certainly part of that world to some extent. He was commissioned, I think, by Prince Edward to write a lovely little number for the Queen many years ago called Cricket, which was performed at Windsor. So, yes, he's kind of, I don't think he's a kind of wild child out on the edge. But he certainly appeals to everybody, I would say.
I had the opportunity to speak to him during the COVID pandemic. I mean, it's difficult to believe now that all our theatres were closed and all the performers, actors and musicians, they were all out of work. And this was a tragic situation. And Andrew Lloyd Webber really fought against it. He had a show called Cinderella, or was it called Cinderella?
Cinderella.
Which was not a success, which is most unusual for him. But he wanted to put it on during the pandemic, and he was pushing against the boundaries, he was pushing against the laws that the government was making. I thought he made a heroic effort on behalf of the theatre. Maybe not everyone thinks the same. What do you think?
Yes. I mean, he very famously, they were desperately trying to get Cinderella to open. It was being put back and back and back. Previews, they were only allowed, at the time, we then got to 50% capacity. Then cast members kept testing positive for COVID, so the press nights we were going to kept disappearing down the track. He did very famously say that he was prepared to be arrested just to have a full capacity show. I think, yes, absolutely, he was fighting very hard for government support, government subsidies, but also sometimes not remembering that he has his own backup. You know, he has money in the bank and he has support, and him being arrested might not be, it might just be a little media thing. It's not the same for everybody else. But his heart was absolutely in the right place, and nobody else was speaking up.
We have the tendency, I think, in Britain to knock down people from their pedestals, so he was quite criticised. And, of course, there came a day when the show was not going on and the people were laid off. And
yes.
I think they heard about it in a very unfortunate way. They didn't hear about it the way they should have done from the management. Now, Guys and Dolls has reappeared yet again. So
yes.
We've moved off Lloyd Webber. This has nothing to do with Lloyd Webber. Guys and Dolls has reappeared yet again.
Yes.
In a new guise.
Yes, absolutely. It's up at the Bridge Theatre, and they very famously have done these immersive performances before. They did Julius Caesar and A Midsummer Night's Dream. And it's this incredible thing where the audience will wrap around, and then the main floor, which would normally be the stalls, whole bunch of the audience are in there as well. And then I saw it this time. You have all these hydraulic stages that are coming up and down, connecting to themselves as walkways, appearing over here and over here. And the audience are being kind of marshaled and shepherded around it and looking up and sometimes being invited in to be part of it. So it's thrilling. It's an exciting, wonderful way to approach this show again.
So one thing you have to say is that you are on your feet. You, a member of the audience, you're on your feet for 2.5 hours. You cannot sit down.
Well, you certainly are. Some people are invited to tables where they're sitting in bars and diners as part of the show almost. And you're also invited to dance. You're not just moving around. Some of the showgirls come and move you. You can be a little bit more middle-aged like me, and you can sit around. So it's also got arena seating all the way around. So it's about half and half. Half the audience is watching from the seats and half. And I would imagine, I have friends that did the moving around part. It's a completely different experience. I wanted to experience it, to be able to see the whole thing. I'm very desperate to go back and be part of the mob. And friends that did that said it's really exciting.
Director?
Nicholas Heitner.
Nicholas Heitner, indeed. And it's the third time he's done this. He did 2 Shakespeares, I think, in the same. Now, I was very upset to hear that Oldham Coliseum was to close. This is a more than 100-year-old theatre, obviously in Oldham. I had the privilege of filming there quite recently, and it is a very, very beautiful theatre. And Arts Council England has cut off the funding, leading some wag this week to say who is doing more damage to the arts this week, the BBC for ending the BBC Singers, or the Arts Council England for cutting off the Oldham Coliseum. And one might say they're pretty much cutting off the London Coliseum, which is where the English National Opera is. So are there two sides to this story about the Oldham Coliseum?
Oldham, I don't know so much about. I do know, ultimately, there wasn't enough money to go around from the Arts Council. I know that they had less money than before. They've also... There's a push to start developing smaller theatres, smaller groups, less traditional venues, less traditional productions. So there's a big clash between that. There's also the very, very real problem still of not enough money coming in from audiences, from revenue. So it's a perfect or imperfect storm of a lot of things all at once, but ultimately deeply upsetting.
It is true that we bear a responsibility. I mean, it's like people who keep saying to me, you know, why do we close all those railway lines under Dr. Beeching? Why? Because we weren't using the railways.
Sure.
Not a great puzzle. I've been going to see things recently on your recommendations. Yesterday I went to see Fedra, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. Good. Felt to me like the theatre in London is pretty healthy. Has it absolutely bounced back, do you think, from COVID?
It's bouncing back. I think what is happening very much at the moment, what I'm seeing, is there are some phenomenal shows and some absolutely hugely successful shows. Standing at the Sky's Edge, which I raved to you about as well, has
which I saw. Fantastic.
Now had all these nominations as well, wonderfully selling out. Other shows, not so much. So I think what we're happening is we're seeing, it's a little bit Darwinian at the moment. It's very much some huge, strong predators almost. Other shows really are suffering. There's not enough floating people to go around, and that's definitely still a problem.
What I think is so interesting is the role that word of mouth plays. I mean, you mentioned these plays to me, I immediately went to see them, and you just know that that's happening. So, you know, I'm a bit of a Darwinian myself. I think, you know, if it's a really great show, it will prosper because people will talk about it and more people will see whether they can get tickets. Stephen Keriazis, thank you so much. Coming up in the next hour, I ask, who is responsible for childcare, parents or the state? And after the BAFTAs and the Oscars, I celebrate the Fidos. That's all after the weather.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. We will see rain or showers over the next few days, increasing winds, particularly in the west. Temperatures around average for the time of year. Looking at the bigger picture, Sunday's high-pressure system moves out the way only to be replaced by low-pressure systems, which means outbreaks of rain and stronger winds. The winds really picking up by the middle of the week. Large waves around western coast and rainfall totals building too. This evening, we've already got outbreaks of rain moving eastwards across Northern Ireland, parts of Scotland, northern England, which could be heavy at times, particularly over the higher grounds. Some localised flooding is possible. Cloud increasing across the rest of England and Wales. Some damp weather here too. Under any clear skies across the far north of Scotland, perhaps a touch of frost for 1 or 2 to begin Monday morning. But for most, a cloudy, damp start to the day. Again, this band of rain giving some heavier spells over the higher ground as it slowly pushes north and eastwards. Further rain also pushing in across southern parts of England and Wales through the day, which could be heavy at times. In between these weather systems, we could get a few glimmers of sunshine, particularly across central areas, and here temperatures reaching 14 or 15 degrees, just a little bit cooler across the far north of Scotland, but some sunny spells here. Into the evening time on Monday, further bands of rain push north and eastwards, which could be heavy at times. The winds start to pick up across southwestern areas around the coast. The rain could be heavy at times as we move into the early hours too. Again, over the higher ground of northern England could lead to some localised flooding, perhaps southern parts of Scotland too. Perhaps drier towards the end of Monday night into Tuesday morning, but very mild temperatures, 9 or 10 Celsius to start Tuesday. But a cloudy start for many. However, we will start to see some bright spells pushing into parts of Northern Ireland, southwestern parts of England and Wales as we go through the day, as this showery rain slowly pushes north-eastwards. The rain holding on across north-east Scotland, and temperatures generally again around average for the time of year, but further wet and windy weather to come towards midweek.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon and welcome to the second hour of Sunday with Michael Portillo with more good conversation, arts, ethical dilemmas, and I promise you this, a sense of the ridiculous. Coming up, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt wants more parents to rejoin the workforce after having children, and billions more of taxpayers' money will be spent on childcare. Is parenting a proper role for the state? As AI apps such as ChatGPT become part of our lives, what are the ethics of artificial intelligence? Living off the land, we meet a forager who finds food in an East London cemetery. And forget the Oscars, I look at the awards for the best canine performances on film, which are known as the Fidos. That's all after the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Very good afternoon to you. It has just gone midday. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is planning to deport the first migrants to Rwanda by the summer. Speaking in Kigali, she says the timing depends on pending legal battles and has indicated the UK could leave the European Court of Human Rights if it hinders the plan. The agreement with Rwanda has been expanded to include all illegal migrants, not just asylum seekers.
Progress is being made rapidly, and I'm really confident on the back of the progress that I've seen here in Kigali that we will be able to operationalise this world-leading agreement very, very soon. The big point here is that there will be a package of high-quality humanitarian support for people who will be relocated to Rwanda. That, combined with our robust new laws, will enable us to break the business model of the people smuggling gangs.
The deal with Rwanda's cost £140 million, and the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary Lisa Nandy says it could have been better spent.
We think you should take that money, put it into the National Crime Agency, create a cross-border cell that disrupts the criminal gangs and send the clearest possible message to those criminal gangs that their behaviour won't be tolerated and that will bring them to account should they persist. Instead, we've had more and more of the tough talk from this government, and last year the boat crossings hit a record high of 45,000. It's not working, and it's about time the government recognised that.
Former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng has accepted he and Liz Truss made mistakes with their mini-budget last autumn, which triggered market turmoil. In an exclusive interview with GB News, he says the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has done a good job of stabilising the economy.
I think Jeremy, rightly perhaps, has adopted a cautious approach given what happened last winter. And he's also very much, I think, looking at the markets, looking at what Treasury officials are doing and trying to do it in a methodical way. And that's where I think I and Liz got it wrong.
Boris Johnson will publish evidence in his defence over allegations he misled Parliament over the Partygate scandal. He's expected to submit a 50-page dossier to the Commons Privileges Committee tomorrow before being questioned by MPs on Wednesday. The investigation is being chaired by Labour's Harriet Harman, but the panel has a Conservative majority. Cabinet Minister Oliver Dowden believes the former Prime Minister will provide compelling evidence.
Having worked with Boris for many years in different capacities, I'm quite sure that he will put forward a very robust defence of his case when he appears before the committee on Wednesday. Ultimately, this is a procedure of the House of Commons, and it's always been the case in these sort of things. It's up to individual members to make up their own minds. So first of all, it will be for the committee to make a determination, and if that necessitates it going to the floor of the House, it will be up to each individual MP to make up their mind.
Vladimir Putin's made a surprise visit to the Ukrainian city of Mariupol, according to Russian state media. If confirmed, it would be his first visit to a newly occupied Ukrainian territory since the start of the war. The port city in Donetsk fell last May after being devastated by Russian forces in one of the longest battles of the conflict. The trip comes after the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for the Russian president. Police searching for a missing teenager have released an image of her leaving a bus station in Glasgow with an unknown man. 15-year-old Faith Marley hasn't been seen since travelling from Edinburgh to Glasgow on Wednesday morning. The pair left Buchanan bus station shortly after 11 a.m. Police are concerned for her well-being, but say there's nothing to suggest she's come to harm. A former Met police officer wants a new review to expose what she has described as a toxic culture of sexism in the force. Alice Vinton, who served with the Met for 10 years, says the job is attractive to bullies chasing power. She also says the police service can only change if bosses admit the profession does attract the wrong kind of people. The review, published next week, will look into the culture and standards in the force. And an emergency alert will be sent to mobile users across the UK next month to test a new public warning system. It's been designed to make people aware of potentially life-threatening situations like floods or wildfires. The siren will be sent on the 23rd of April, and users won't be able to use their phone until they acknowledge it. This is GB News. More as it happens, as always, but now it is back to Sunday with Michael Portillo.
Thank you, Aaron. In last week's budget, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt announced a £4 billion plan to extend taxpayer-funded childcare. Currently, working parents with 3- and 4-year-olds are eligible for 30 hours per week of childcare paid by the state. And the Chancellor plans to expand this to 1- and 2-year-olds in stages between now and 2025. It's part of the government's bid to persuade people back into employment. Campaigners have argued that parents are disincentivised because the cost of childcare swallows up their pay. The ethical issue is whether the state or parents are responsible for children. Economists criticise the move because it's unlikely to tip enough people into work to justify the cost. It certainly preempts money that might have been spent on defence or social care, or indeed used to cut taxes. I'm joined in the studio now by Megan Meek-O'Connor, Senior Policy Advisor at Save the Children, and Professor Len Shackleton, an Editorial and Research Fellow at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Lovely to see you both. Welcome to GB News. If a Martian came down to Earth, might that Martian be puzzled that we are giving money to child carers to take care of people's children so that those people can go to work? Wouldn't it be more logical to help those people to stay at home and look after their children?
Well, I think that parents should have a choice about what it is that they want to do, whether it is that they want to stay at home and look after their kids or go into work and pay someone who's very highly qualified, highly trained to look after their children in a way that will really help with their development. And I think that's what is exciting to Save the Children about these proposals, is that for a long time there's been a choice for some parents, who are wealthier, and so can make this choice to either pay for childcare or stay at home. But now that choice should be available to more parents who are more able to make that choice.
You may not be surprised to know that I'm all in favour of choice, but this choice is being paid for by other people, by taxpayers. And I repeat, is there not something rather peculiar about this? I mean, the children have to be looked after. Why shouldn't we think of those children being looked after by their parents rather than by other people subsidised by the state? It seems to be rather odd.
Well, they are still going to be looked after by their parents for a lot of the time. But, I mean, what we want to see is we see childcare as this kind of vital social infrastructure. It shouldn't just be from school that kids get that education, that parents get that choice to go out to work. Parents should be able to work, to increase their family's incomes, to potentially move their family out of poverty. It's usually mothers who stay at home and work because of the gender pay gap. These reforms should help end that pay gap, hopefully. To us, it doesn't seem odd. To me, it feels like something that should happen for children, and it gives parents choice.
Len Shackleton, I've been leading with a line of questioning there. Do you have any sympathy with the thought within my line of questioning?
I do. I think this particular generosity from the taxpayer is probably misplaced. The great bulk of it will actually go to help people who are already in work. It won't help, on the OBR's figures, Michael, they're saying that this will probably bring back into work about 60,000 women. But the average hours work will be 16 hours. So that's really 30,000 FTE, if you like, of people coming back to the workforce.
Full-time equivalent.
And that's going to cost, per person, that's going to cost about £15,000 when you do the calculation on it. Whether this is the best way to use money to support parents, I'm really quite doubtful about. I mean, as you were suggesting, many parents don't want to use childcare, at least not on the scale which is being suggested here. This particular subvention does absolutely nothing to help parents who are staying at home. And bear in mind that some communities, very interesting ethnic differences in this. Some communities make very little use of formal childcare. They're getting no support at all from the state. So if you are going to spend money on this, I think it should be much more targeted rather than just a sort of whacking it out to everybody.
Well, the other thing that has puzzled me is that a Conservative government is presiding over record levels of public spending and record levels of taxation, and yet is innovating by inventing new parts of the welfare state, extending the welfare state increasingly, and, as you say, including to many middle-class people.
Well, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And, I mean, it's quite interesting. You're an ex-Secretary of State for Defence, aren't you? I see in this budget that Ben Wallace is only getting about £5 billion, which is more or less in the same ballpark area as what is being given as a transfer payment, really, to parents. Whether this is a sensible use of public money at this time, I have my doubts.
I used to be Chief Secretary as well, and maybe those are the instincts that have been coming out through the course of our questioning just now. But I'm joined down the line now by Jolie Brearley. She's founder of Pregnant, Then Screwed, a charity launched in 2015 to campaign on discrimination against working mothers. Your organisation has a striking title, Jolie. What discrimination affected you? Why did you get into this?
When I was 4 months pregnant with my first child, I informed my employer that I was pregnant, and the next day they sacked me by voicemail. And my employer was a children's charity. So I then tried to do something about it, but found the legal system almost impossible to navigate. There were far too many barriers that prevented me from doing it. And so I was really cross that it had happened, and I felt completely let down. And so I set Pregnant Then Screwed up in response to that.
Jolie, I'm pretty surprised. Sounds like you were too. That what happened to you could be lawful. Is it because you hadn't been employed for very long, or why was it they were able to get rid of you just because you were pregnant?
It's not lawful, it's completely illegal, but obviously illegal things still happen. And we know that 54,000 women a year get pushed out of their jobs for getting pregnant or for taking maternity leave. That's 1 in 9 pregnant women. It's a woman every 10 minutes. And it's getting gradually worse. It's not improving. The data that we have shows that it's almost doubled in 10 years rather than actually improving. The problem is that it's really difficult to do anything about it. Fewer than 1% of women who experience pregnancy or maternity discrimination even raise a tribunal claim.
And it's slightly off the point, but I suppose that you would have welcomed the government's announcement in the budget, would you?
I mean, yes, we were really pleased. We've been campaigning for this for 6 or 7 years now. There are many problems with the plans that have been laid out. We don't believe the funding is enough to do what they want to do. There is a massive skills issue in childcare and early years education. We need about 38,000 childcare professionals in order to make this plan work. So where we're going to get those people from is a massive question. But yes, we are really pleased to see that finally the government are listening. We know that investing in childcare and early years education is an investment in the economy. It is not a cost, it is an investment. We are way behind other countries on this. So we were really pleased to see some movement.
Megan, we are running out of time, but briefly, do you feel that this is properly funded? Are you concerned about how long it's taking to be implemented?
We don't think it's properly funded. We've done some analysis and other economists have done analysis, and to make up the gap that that the government is currently paying for the free 3 to 4 euro, the 3 to 4 offer that's currently in place, they'd need to invest almost £2 billion, and they've only committed 240 million to that. So it's just a little bit more than a tenth. And we're really worried about what that's going to mean for providers, that providers are going to have to close their doors. And it's all very well and good offering free hours, but if the nurseries are shut and parents can't get them, then it won't work.
And Len, very briefly, quite a surprise move by the Chancellor here at a time when public money is very tight. What do you think are its implications?
I think, well, we've just heard there that it is not enough. It will never be enough. Once we've started this whole new area of public spending on a massive scale, this will be like education. There'll never be enough. There'll be strikes. There'll be. I also think we'll probably see a gradual nationalisation of the childcare sector, because more and more providers will find it difficult under this kind of restrictive arrangement to make a profit. And as they drop out, we'll have to have local authorities and schools developing nursery care and so on, and this will be more expensive.
A good debate, I think. Thank you very much to Professor Len Shackleton, Megan Keane-O'Connor, and down the line, Jolie Brearley. Coming up, artificial intelligence is becoming part of our lives. Can we ensure that it's a force for good? After the break.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Welcome back. This last week, leaders in the field of artificial intelligence met in Cambridge to discuss their responsibilities. Included in the discussion was the future of work, governance, and how to educate the lawmakers to encourage innovation as well as to protect us. The meeting comes as there are two significant legal challenges to AI. In the first, media company Getty is suing an AI company for using its images to create content. And in the second, in the United States, a computer scientist wants to be recognised as an inventor so that he can patent his innovations in AI. Although AI has been around for the last 5 decades, its use has grown exponentially in recent years. And it seems that regulation needs to catch up. Olivia Gamblin is founder of Ethical Intelligence and is an AI ethicist and joins me now. Welcome to GB News. You were in Cambridge, were you? And was this an important and an overdue meeting, do you think?
Absolutely. So the field of responsible AI, we really took off only in the past 3 years. So a lot of us knew each other as these little LinkedIn profiles that were interacting on social media, but hadn't given the chance to come together in one space and have these pertinent conversations live together.
What should I be worried about?
So I have been termed as the optimistic ethicist. So I tend to say, you know, there's not much to worry about. It's more up to us. We're in control. I get this question a lot, though, where people are concerned about AI taking over the world, the robots taking over the world, what it means for their future. And those are well-founded concerns. But at the end of the day, I always flip it back onto the person. I say, you know, you're still in control. We are the humans creating the machines, creating the models, and therefore it comes down to us and our own responsibility. So I'd be more concerned if you were you were slacking and afraid.
I saw the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, where the computer switches off all the human beings. That's not going to happen to us. But...
Well, hopefully not. If we start implanting Neuralinks and chips in our brains, then there's a little bit more concern there.
OK, so just in the short term, we've got this software now that writes stuff for us, and that's raised issues about plagiarism and about whether we can trust examinations, scripts, and so on and so on and so on. So let's just begin with that. Is that worrying?
Yes, that's worrying in the sense that it is challenging the current way that we approach our education and approach how we as humans interact with information. So we're moving past this time where intelligence is based off of recall, where I can sit here and I can list off facts to you. I can turn to ChatGPT and have it list off facts for me. You know, there's a couple questions whether or not that will be based in truth or fact, but it can still list off those facts. So then it's up to me now as the human to be able to use that information given to me and interact with it. So it's an interesting time where we're no longer looking at recall and we're looking at more having to educate around strategic and creative thinking. So it is a little concerning of the fact that we're based in an old school frame of thought, and the technology is now pushing us into what's going to be, I think, is an exciting future, but full of different risks and ethical concerns.
Let's go to the other end of the spectrum. To what extent are you concerned that lawmakers are going to make regulations which are dumb and which are going to prevent innovation?
I do have some concern, mainly because our technology, it's quite interesting. We're at the cutting edge, but it's very difficult for law to keep up with that because it moves so quickly. For example, we have the EU AI Act that's coming into effect in the coming years, and generative AI, which is what ChatGPT is based off of, generative AI didn't exist or wasn't on any of those risk or early on law proposals. And now, as a retrospect, they're having to fit the law to a new system, even though that system really falls outside of what they were currently imagining the capacities for artificial intelligence to be. So I do have concern that there is going to be too much risk and burden put onto companies where there is a lot of documentation and auditing required, instead of putting the focus onto what kind of support can we give to companies and startups, especially being able to operate in these high-risk zones, but do it ethically, do it responsibly. You know, we can sponsor these startups having an ethicist in-house just to be able to sit with them and have their expertise on hand.
It is an ethical question, although it's somewhat to the side. I wonder whether you have a view as to whether AI is going to destroy employment. If we look through these glass panels here, there are lots of people out there who are worried that their jobs are going to be done by AI. Should they be?
No. In a certain case, some, yes. Anything that can be automated will start to become overtaken by AI, let's say. But at the end of the day, nothing can replace the human intelligence. And what I mean by this is, for example, ChatGPT, it has limitations. It only can operate within the bounds of information that's already out there, data that humans have already created. So me as an artist, I can create art, and then I can, though, take my art and push it to the next level. Something like a system like DALL-E that is image generation can only operate within something I've already created and bring in different pieces from other artists, but it can't ever ideate. It can't create.
Well, that's very interesting. And it's certainly the case that, of course, we've often feared that new technology was going to do away with jobs. It did, of course, but what we couldn't foresee was that jobs would be created elsewhere. And here we are in a situation today of very high employment. Many thanks to you, Olivia Gamblin. A week ago, glamorous movie stars graced the champagne-coloured carpet to pick up their coveted Oscars. One group of hard-working actors is less recognised, even though they often steal the scene. A ceremony in West London promises to fill that void. Please put your paws together for the annual Fido Awards. 4 incredible dogs on screen. The winners have just been announced, and GB News is in Chiswick. Toby Rose, founder of the Fido Awards, joins us now from Chiswick Cinema. Hello, is it true, Toby, that the awards have been announced, and are you able to tell us about some winners?
Well, the awards have definitely been announced. They were on stage here behind me at the Chiswick Cinema, 4 very incredible dogs on screen this year, and it was a big success, and we had lots of dogs on stage collecting awards from Blockbuster Bowser, Mutt Moment, Comedy Canine, Historical Hound and Rom-Com Rover. Good stuff, a lot of enthusiasm.
Is it true that the dogs that were collecting the awards were not the stars themselves, that they've been nominated to pick up the awards?
The dogs themselves were very much stand-ins, but they were very much, of course, from the same gene pool as the winners. As most of the films were either from America or even northern stretches of the UK, to bring them into the Chiswick Cinema was not possible, but some wonderful dogs were there and are indeed with me here now. They were on stage and they were absolutely fantastic. May I show them to you, Michael?
I'd be delighted if you would.
I'm just going to move across. There was a talk earlier about whether you yourself are a dog-friendly person or you might be more cat or neither.
Of course, I love dogs. Introduce your canine friends to me, please.
Here we are. To my right, we have here the lovely Poppy. And Poppy was the dog that was the stand-in for Rosette, the winner of Blockbuster Bowser, which was Cocaine Bear. And over to the right, Everything Everywhere All at Once, is the Pomeranian Zeus, held by the lovely Fleur. And this Pomeranian stood in for the wonderful dog that was swung around right in front of the Oscar-winning wonderfulness that is Michelle Yeoh.
And what happened to the dog in, help me with this, the Banshees of what?
The Banshees of Inisherin, which was the multi-Oscar nominated film. That dog was with us in spirit fully. Not only was that dog here in the shape of Snope, because the dog that won the Fabulous Comedy Canine Award for the Banshees of Inisherin then went on to scoop Best in World, and the lookalike dog we had here was Snope, which was a collie, a lovely border collie, black and white. And not only that, but the wonderful actress owner of Snope, Kerry Fox, she made some wonderful little cookies, black and white icing upon them. So you had border collie biscuits, you had collie collars, and it was just really a celebration of Best in World, and we were most pleased.
And apparently you also had Carrie Fox. You couldn't make it up. Thank you very much to you and all your canine friends, and indeed the people who are holding them. Thank you very much for being on GB News. Well, coming up, capturing the beauty that Britain has to offer, we talk to the winners of the British Wildlife Photography Awards. That's after the news with Aaron Armstrong.
It is just coming up to 12:30. I am Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is planning to deport the first migrants to Rwanda by the summer, saying the country's clearly ready to start receiving them. Speaking in Kigali, she says the timing depends on pending legal battles and has indicated the UK could move away from the European Convention of Human Rights if it hinders the plan. The agreement with Rwanda has been expanded to include all illegal migrants, not just asylum seekers. Former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng's accepted he and Liz Truss made mistakes with their mini-budget last autumn, which triggered market turmoil, hitting the economy. In an exclusive interview with GB News, he says the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has delivered a good budget, although he's called for faster tax cuts and he criticised the hike in corporation tax. Boris Johnson will publish evidence in his defence over allegations he misled Parliament on the Partygate scandal. He's expected to submit a dossier to the Commons Privileges Committee tomorrow before being questioned by MPs on Wednesday. And Vladimir Putin has made a surprise visit to the Ukrainian city of Mariupol, according to Russian state media. If confirmed, it would be his first visit to Ukrainian territory that Moscow annexed in September. The port city in Donetsk fell last May after being devastated by Russian forces in one of the longest battles in the conflict. And just yesterday, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for the Russian president over war crimes. TV online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. But stay where you are, don't go anywhere. Michael is back in just a moment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. We can move on from dogs to the urban fox, the roe deer and the tawny owl, because they all feature in the British Wildlife Photography Awards. Founded in 2009, the awards are open to both professional and amateur photographers and highlight British biodiversity, species and habitats. This year, the judges had the mammoth task of evaluating over 13,000 entries to award prizes. I'm delighted to say that we have two winners in the studio with us now. Lewis Newman won in the Animal Portraits category with a beautiful picture of a red fox entitled Sleeping with Dandelions. And Billy Evans-Freak is the RSPB Young British Wildlife Photographer of the Year with a stunning picture called Branching Out. Well, welcome to you both. Billy, how did you take that picture, which I believe is of a little tawny owl?
Yeah, I'd always wanted to photograph a tawny owl, and I knew that they were around our house in the local woodland. And so one night I was out with my camera and I heard a blackbird alarm call, which is like a sign that there's definitely a tawny owl doing something in that woodland. So I went out into the wood and I was tracking down that call. And then whilst I was looking for the adult, and then I suddenly heard a squeak behind me, so I turned around, and after about 10 minutes of looking, there was a tiny ball of fluff in the top of a tree. I just snapped a few shots.
What time of day are we talking about?
Dusk, or just before dusk. So.
OK, but the photograph is good and clear. What sort of camera are you using? I mean, is it quite a sophisticated piece of kit?
Yeah, it's quite, well, it's a Canon R6. It's a mirrorless camera, and it's quite good at low light, which was good for this sort of picture. And then I had a long 600mm telephoto lens, which is quite good for the long-distance subjects I was photographing.
Have you done a lot of wildlife photography?
I think it's about 5 years I've been slowly getting into wildlife photography and improving my skills.
Yeah, and you do feel that, do you, that you're getting better all the time?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. I think 5 years ago I was photographing little kind of insects and plants in the garden, and now I've found a tawny owl, so, yeah.
And you are studying photography at A-level?
Yes.
Do you have an intention to take this much further? Do you see yourself as a professional photographer?
Well, that is the dream, yeah, hopefully.
Really? And to be a wildlife photographer?
Yeah, hopefully.
Have you had any opportunity to photograph anything more exotic than is on offer in the British Isles? Have you been able to go abroad and shoot anything?
No, I kind of mainly focus on the British wildlife that we have around us on our doorstep.
But maybe in the future we'll have you filming whales or, I don't know, wildcats in Spain or something.
Yeah.
Lewis, a beautiful photograph, yours. It's a vixen, isn't
yes,
it?
yeah.
And what those are dandelion spores, seeds that are flying around. How did you get that picture?
Yeah, so it was basically, I was really busy at work that year, so I had to focus my time on like local wildlife as such and get down there as much as I could. And yeah, this particular vixen, yeah, the area that I'd go down, I'd sort of know their routines and stuff like that, and she would actually sit away from the den site at the time. So yeah, every time I'd go down there, she'd be in a similar sort of position, and it would be sort of amongst the wildflowers. And then, yeah, as the wildflowers sort of started to grow, that's when it sort of started to, you know, give me the idea of her being amongst them. Or, yeah, when the dandelions started to, you know, grow their seeds, that was when I sort of thought about the idea of, yeah, you know, because she was getting sort of covered in them. But, yeah.
You didn't stage it, or you didn't blow those seeds at her?
Oh, no. You couldn't get anywhere close to her, like, even if you wanted to. So, yeah, no, it was, yeah, it was... The thing is, there's like a small amount of time that you could get it, because obviously once the seeds have gone, they've gone for good then, and she was only in one particular area. So there was like a limited amount of, you know, time that she could have been covered in them sort of seeds.
And when you see a frame like that, do you know straight away that you have potentially a winner, an exceptional photograph?
I mean, it was, yeah, it was definitely out the ordinary for me, and it was something that I'd never taken before. And as soon as I took the photo, I took a photo of the back of my camera and sent it straight to my partner, because, yeah, like, I was super proud of it. So, yeah, like, hopefully it would have been a winner, but, yeah, just had to wait and see sort of thing.
Patience must be the virtue that's most required of a wildlife photographer, is that true?
Yeah, no, definitely, and putting the hours in, you know, that's probably one of the bigger things, you know, even just going out and trying to find new locations and stuff like that, you know, it's not just, yeah, going out with your camera, it's putting in the hours to find different locations and stuff like that, so, yeah.
I mean, would you have any idea how many photographs you took to get one as good as that? I'm trying to encourage people who take photographs and never get anything like as good as that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just nice to be out in nature, you know. It's, yeah, it's like, for me, it's like a calming sort of thing, because it's not my full-time sort of thing to do. I'm a plumbing and heating engineer, so, yeah, it's sort of, yeah, it's the thing that calms me down. Like, I can have my own little time in nature, so, yeah. But, I mean, it takes thousands of photos, for sure.
Do your mates who are also plumbers rib you at all for your hobby?
I mean, at the beginning, you know, it was, yeah, I don't see... Yeah, I'm like the only one within my sort of group that does wildlife photography. But yeah, animals for me have been, yeah, like a close thing to my heart since like I've been young. So,
Billy, we talked about your aptitude for photography, but do you feel very strongly about wildlife?
Yeah, in particular British wildlife, I'd say. I just think, yeah, very important to show people the wildlife that we have on our doorstep.
David Attenborough is busy promoting British wildlife at the moment. Do you find people like that a big influence on you?
Yeah, definitely. David Attenborough is definitely someone that I have looked up to and do look up to, yeah.
What might you want to photograph in future? Your prize was sponsored by the RSPB, but I think you didn't have to take a bird. But are you particularly interested in birds?
Yeah, I think birds, especially around where I live, there's a lot of birds, so I'm often photographing birds. But a next subject that I'd love to photograph is an otter. I'm hoping to go up to the Isle of Mull soon to photograph, or track down and photograph otters, which would be amazing.
That would be amazing. And what will you do with the prize money?
Well, at the moment, I've been researching kind of wide-angle lenses, because in the competition, there's been a lot of amazing kind of habitat-style shots where they've used a much wider lens, so I want to experiment with that a bit more.
Congratulations to you both, and you're going to bring a lot of pleasure to a lot of people. Thank you, Billy Evans-Freak and Lewis Newman, and they'll bring a lot of pleasure because the British Wildlife Photography Awards tour the United Kingdom in a travelling exhibition. For thousands of years, humans were hunter-gatherers. Nomadic communities foraged and hunted for food. Some think that lifestyle is healthier, and eating seasonally influences many popular diets today. In a time of food shortages and unreliable weather, is it time to reconnect with the land and go back to foraging? Friend of the programme and author Henry Elliott went to the wilds of Tower Hamlets Cemetery Park.
Well, we're here in Tower Hamlets Cemetery Park with Monica Wilde, known as Mo.
Yeah.
Mo, you're a forager, you're a prize-winning author.
Thank you.
You're a herbalist. What are we going to do today here in Tower Hamlets?
Well, I thought what we'd do is just go and look and see what's coming up. We've just recently had this food shortage of salads and things like that, you know. And despite that, you could actually go out and pick a whole salad now. Maybe by the end of it we will have. So there's a lot of food that's there in the wild that we've just forgotten about.
Now, your book, which came out last year, is called The Wilderness Cure. That's about a year that you spent eating in exclusively foraged food.
Yes.
That is an extraordinary feat. How was that experience?
It was an amazing experience. It was something I'd been meaning to do for a long time because, you know, I've been teaching foraging for about 15 or 16 years. And people would always say, well, this is all very well, but could you actually like live on the wild for like a year? And I'd read somewhere that there's only enough food in the computerized systems, the just-in-time computerized systems, to last 3 days.
Oh my goodness.
And it just seemed to be a really good time to think, well, you know, if we needed to live off wild food, could it be done?
Now, most of the time you live in central Scotland, and I believe it's right that during the year of eating wild, you ate something like 300 different species of plant, which is extraordinary. I mean, that diversity is incredible.
And 87 species of mushrooms.
Wow.
20 species of seaweed.
But is that easier to do in Scotland than, let's say, here?
It's just as easy. Look at all. This is a salad bar right here.
So to me, this looks like a slightly scrubby earth mound with some daffodils, but otherwise I'm at a loss where to start here.
Well, you wouldn't want to eat the daffodils. And you should never put anything in your mouth unless you're 100% sure you know what it is. But once you know, and I mean, you can tell the difference between a cabbage and a lettuce, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so you have the mental capacity to do this.
Okay, good.
Shall I point some of the things out?
Please, I'd love to. I'd love to do that.
But salad-wise, we've got cow parsley coming up here. Now, this is one that people have to be very careful not to confuse with poison hemlock.
Okay.
But you can see that it has this little hairy stem.
Yes.
And this gutter down the middle. You know, that's one of the first things that distinguishes it, apart from the fact that there aren't any purple spots. Little carroty.
That's
little carrot
so
pot.
flavourful. It's delicious. Wow. That's really, really good. I'm amazed that we've literally just stepped off the path and you've already found 2 edible plants.
Yeah, and then here we've got wood violets.
Very pretty flowers.
Pretty flowers. Would you like one?
Sure.
You need to be respectful when you're picking where other people are and not to take everything. And, you know, and if you're in an area where there's a lot of people, get together, make a community harvesting plan so it's done sustainably.
So this leads on to the work you're doing at the moment with Tim Spector on nutrition. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So when I did my year, I analysed my gut microbiome every couple of months throughout it. And what it showed was that my gut microbiome started to change and bacteria would go crazy. So what I did was to get 26 other foragers to commit to living on only wild food, some for 1 month, some for 3 months. And then in collaboration with the Zoe Gut Microbiome Project with Professor Tim Spector, we're now testing ourselves against 26 people eating normal food and 26 people eating an advanced Zoe diet.
So here I recognise daffodils, I can see some snowdrops, but everything else is a sea of green for me here.
Yes, well, you've got the wood violets that we looked at earlier. And then what you've also got here, I'm just picking it away from the doggy area, is wild garlic.
Ah.
Go on. I'm not going to kill you.
A really strong garlicky.
Really strong garlicky
That's incredible.
flavour. You know, it can be very difficult sometimes trying to describe some of the flavours to people who've never tried some of these things before.
I feel like I've just eaten a clove of garlic.
Yep.
That's amazing. That would add so much flavour to a dish.
But obviously you mustn't confuse it with the leaves of daffodils and snowdrops, because they are poisonous. And dog's mercury is poisonous too. In Lebanese cooking and in Syria and places like that, they make a dish called molokhia. And basically it's a type of mallow, which this is as well. And it has what we call a mucilaginous texture, so it helps to thicken the soups and things. So in Syria and Lebanon, you know, this is and Egypt, you know, molokhia is a key sought-after dish. And here it is in the lawn.
Yes, it is much softer.
A slightly sort of softer, almost slippery texture.
Yes, that's right. And it's sort of, as I'm chewing it, it's kind of turning into more of a, like a sort of paste.
We have everything that we need in nature. And the thing I discovered, you know, going into my wild food year, you know, I expected scarcity and hardship. And what I found was abundance.
Even in winter, you know, the depths of winter?
Even in the depths of winter, there'll be somewhere in a little sheltered space. You know, even on Christmas Day, you can go and pick oyster mushrooms or velvet shanks. And you can't have a relationship with someone unless you spend time with them. And that includes nature. If you're not out there in contact and experiencing that benevolence, why are you going to care if you trash it?
And what you've really demonstrated to me today is, you know, you might live in a city and feel like, well, I don't have access to nature. I'm not living in the centre of Scotland, but we've walked into a park in the middle of London and you've found an extraordinary amount of food. So it is accessible for everyone.
It is accessible for everyone. And you don't have to have a degree, you know, any colour, any gender, any sexuality, any educational level. Everyone can do this. This belongs to us all.
Well, Mo, thank you so much for talking to us today and for, well, it's been an absolutely eye-opening experience for me to experience such delicious flavours in a central city park. So thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much to Henry Elliott, taking a walk on the wild side with Monica Wilde. And I'm glad that they mentioned there that some of the things that you find in a cemetery can be poisonous. So please be very careful and take advice before just eating the greenery that is all around you. Andrew Rippon is here. You're going to be on at 1 o'clock.
Yes, I am. Can I just say that your face was a picture during that? I don't think that you were quite as enthusiastic as Henry was about that food, were you?
Why do you think we sent Henry? I'm perfectly willing to do those things, and under guidance, it's absolutely fine. I have eaten some absolutely delicious forage meals. You're going to be talking about something which I did not mention on my programme, which is Boris, because he's coming before the committee on Wednesday, and I think it's likely to be televised for 5 hours.
5 hours live television. I think that we're going to see some fireworks, because I think anybody that's been reading any of the papers today will see that he's apparently coming up with a dossier that proves that, in fact, a great deal of what was said about him in relation to his behaviour during the Partygate scandal by people who are, and I quote, not on my side. And I think what we're going to be looking at is whether or not is he guilty, is he innocent, is he being set up, or is it just, you know, Boris being a bit, shall we say, a bit loose with the truth, perhaps?
Well, as I said to Camilla Tominey earlier, you know, when you are a minister, a civil servant hands you a bit of paper, and, you know, you're not an automaton, but if you go to the dispatch box, what is on that bit of paper is something that you rely on. And what Boris is now saying is that the bits of paper he was getting authorised him to say that no regulations have been broken. There's some further evidence in that at the time, 10 Downing Street was publishing on Flickr photographs of what was going on in Downing Street, not something they would have done if they had thought that they were breaking regulations. And then the third strand, as far as I can see, of his argument is that he doubts whether Harriet Harman, who is the chair of the committee, is independent. He's going to undermine her credibility.
Yes, well, she's already gone public, hasn't she, and said that she believes that he is guilty. And I suppose, you know, again, as a number of commentators are saying today, there's not a judge in the land that would go into a court of law before a decision has been taken on a particular situation by giving an announcement and saying, I believe that person is guilty. I think there are going to be fireworks on Wednesday, I really do, because it's not just Boris who's going to be talking, but other people who are there to support his version of events. So we're going to be looking at that with an MP and with a couple of other political commentators as well.
What you just said there slightly reminded me that the Supreme Court justices who ruled on Brexit had views on Brexit.
They did indeed.
Angela Rippon will be here at 1 o'clock. Thank you to all my guests this week. Next week, we'll mark the anniversary of women in the stock exchange and ask why men don't read fiction. Thank you for being with me today. That's all for today. Back next week. Bye-bye.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. We will see rain or showers over the next few days, increasing winds, particularly in the west. Temperatures around average for the time of year. Looking at the bigger picture, Sunday's high-pressure system moves out the way only to be replaced by low-pressure systems, which means outbreaks of rain and stronger winds. The winds really picking up by the middle of the week. Large waves around western coasts and rainfall totals building too. This evening, we've already got outbreaks of rain moving eastwards across Northern Ireland, parts of Scotland, northern England, which could be heavy at times, particularly over the higher grounds. Some localised flooding is possible. Cloud increasing across the rest of England and Wales. Some damp weather here too. Under any clear skies across the far north of Scotland, perhaps a touch of frost for 1 or 2 to begin Monday morning. But for most, a cloudy, damp start to the day. Again, this band of rain giving some heavier spells over the higher ground as it slowly pushes north and eastwards. Further rain also pushing in across southern parts of England and Wales through the day, which could be heavy at times. In between these weather systems, we could get a few glimmers of sunshine, particularly across central areas, and here temperatures reaching 14 or 15 degrees. Just a little bit cooler across the far north of Scotland, but some sunny spells here. Into the evening time on Monday, further bands of rain push north and eastwards, which could be heavy at times. The winds start to pick up across southwestern areas around the coast. The rain could be heavy at times as we move into the early hours too. Again, over the higher ground of northern England could lead to some localised flooding, perhaps southern parts of Scotland too. Perhaps drier towards the end of Monday night into Tuesday morning, but very mild temperatures, 9 or 10 Celsius to start Tuesday. But a cloudy start for many. However, we will start to see some bright spells pushing into parts of Northern Ireland, southwestern parts of England and Wales as we go through the day as this showery rain slowly pushes north-eastwards. The rain holding on across north-east Scotland and temperatures generally again around average for the time of year, but further wet and windy weather to come towards midweek.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories.